Hello there, and welcome to Uncut with Gina and Sukhdev. We have a very special guest for you today, Mark Anthony King. And I'm very excited to be able to introduce him to you. And I'm going to take a bit of time to read his bio. Those of you who've watched the show before know that I read the bio because these are incredibly rich pieces of information, and I don't want to miss anything vital. Mark Anthony King is a master of words. He delivers soul-searing messages in both verbal and written form, engaging his audience to deeply reflect. He's a 3-time best-selling author, publisher, award-winning motivational speaker, and one of the most sought-after multifaceted coaches who specialize in social and emotional intelligence. He's also a neuro-linguistic programming master practitioner, as well as specializing in timeline therapy, weight loss management, and a holistic health and strategic intervention. His incredible love for people has allowed him the privilege of coaching hundreds of clients from all nationalities, age groups, and walks of life in the areas of relationships, leadership, and curing lifelong phobias, helping clients achieve physical transformations into their healthier version of themselves, or helping a suicidal individual rediscover the beauty of life. Thank you so much and welcome. We're really looking forward to speaking with you. Can we start?
It's beautiful to be here. And I just have to say that there's just something so special about the Queen's English. I can listen to you speak all day.
Well, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Would you share with us your story? What took you from, being when you were a child to here? Give us a flavor of your story.
Boy, pain is, I think, the greatest catalyst and probably the greatest teacher that God can bless us with. Pain can rear its ugly head in very many forms. Multiple versions of abuse, physical, emotional, mental, sometimes even spiritual. We feel spiritually attacked, right? But ultimately it's pain, but it's a gift. So I say I was blessed with pain from an early age. I recall being, Les Brown, my third father, my friend, my mentor, he says that you should label jars, not children. And I was blessed, hindsight being 2020, I was blessed with being given a great deal of labels when I was young. I was labeled as having ADD, as having ADHD, as having social anxiety, as being epileptic, which I ended up not being epileptic, but I would space out and they would assume that I was having what's called silent seizures. Mm-hmm. Now, I was also diagnosed as being on the spectrum of autism. And something happens when you're labeled. You're judged and you're perceived a certain way, and you're related to in a very particular manner. And that manner, depending on the label, is either going to be positive or negative. So I had all these negative labels, and I was related to in a very dark way. And in addition to being physically abused and sexually abused from the time that I was probably, I remember the first time I was sexually abused, actually, I was about maybe 6 years old, and it was by an older man. And I was sexually abused again when I was around 8 years old, 8 to 9, by an older woman. And for anybody who's been abused, we tend to relate to the world a bit differently when we've been abused. It's very difficult, it's challenging to recognize that you have value or worth when people treat you in a manner that completely contradicts what you might be telling yourself. If you tell yourself that you matter or that you have value, when the people that are around you are constantly doing things that in essence, like I said, contradict that, your internal dialogue becomes very different. So, and it's not to say that childhood was all bad, right? Because we all have beautiful and we all have painful moments, but oftentimes we become lost within the painful moments. And we tend to wear those painful moments as our identity. This is who we are. We are an abused person. We are worth less. We are less than. So additionally, since I was labeled a problem child, I was put in a very special program. So I became a casualty of the public school system. And, you know, what ended up happening was I went into this program and I tested for something called gifted. Now, I remember I spent the entire day just filling out forms and drawing and answering questions and stuff. And it was with a really, really fun woman. I enjoyed being with her the entire day very, very much. And she said she was going to put me in gifted. Now, the catch was gifted was full because due to like safety hazards, they only can have a certain number of desks within a classroom. So because of that, they said, all right, well, Mark, we're going to put you in this other classroom with these other children. We're going to hold you there until we can negotiate with the fire chief and we can see if we can bring one more desk into the classroom and then you'll be back in gifted. Well, I didn't know. And they made it out to appear that this other class was going to be virtually identical to gifted, very tailored, specific learning, very hands-on, one-on-one. You know, they painted it in a manner that your child is going to be getting the type of instruction they crave and they deserve. So it's, in very many ways, it sounded better than gifted, you know, maybe even more exclusive because this was even smaller than the gifted class. Well, this program was called SARP, and that's an acronym for Students at Risk Program. So they threw me in with the children, and this was basically just to get an understanding, like a halfway house. This was the step between us and the juvenile detention center. So in essence, it's the worst of the worst with every single behavioral problem that you can think of who are a hop and a skip away from being sent to juvie. So in an attempt to, I guess, rehabilitate them or help them, they created this program.
Right.
Which one can think, okay, it's altruistic in nature, it's somewhat beautiful, but I later then came to understand.
I have to say is what springs to mind when I'm listening to you.
Yeah, I would later come to understand that, and this was a product of, remember, this was supposed to be a very temporary stop for me.
Yeah.
This was supposed to be, I believe they told me 2 weeks at most. Well, those 2 weeks ended up being 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. I became a casualty, and I would later come to understand that this was, they threw me in this class so that they wouldn't lose funding for the program. So, and I was the youngest person in this class, so I was around 11 years old, around 6th grade, and I was in class with 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds who they would keep failing, they'd keep getting held back. So definitely I got picked on and I got teased and stuff, but I was getting it there and at home. So it was just a lot of pain. And I remember I went into 9th grade, and at this point I developed a very, very toxic relationship with food, because in my head I was seeking comfort. And between the sexual abuse at 6, between the sexual abuse at 8, between the physical abuse that I was enduring, I turned to food. And somehow between, I say somehow like it's not the fact that I just kept eating, somehow magically between 6th grade and 9th grade, I'd managed to gain about 70 pounds. And I start 9th grade at 51% body fat and 220 pounds. Now, bear in mind, the average walrus and seal are at about 45% body fat. So I was fatter than a walrus, literally, not hypothetically. And just the weight of everything that I had been through at the time, I began focusing more on the abuses and more on being left out and more on the labels and the diagnosis and everything. And I ended up feeling hopeless. And that's a dangerous thing to feel, because as you know, hope is the only thing that keeps humanity alive. The either conscious or unconscious belief that tomorrow will be better.
Yeah.
That tomorrow will be okay. That the sun will rise and set on your problem's end. Well, I lost hope. And when we lose hope, we lose the desire to be here. Because what's the point?
Yeah.
If everything is abuse, if everything is being ostracized, if everything is being labeled and judged, and not just by strangers, because one could say the opinions of strangers are inconsequential at best, by the people that we love the most, by the people who are here to protect us and guide us. If they happen to be the ones that are perpetuators of the abuse, which was my case. I recall my uncles used to hit us with weightlifting belts. You know, those really, really thick belts that bodybuilders wrap around their midsection. Used to hit us with that. My grandfather, may he rest in peace, used to throw us on the ground and kick us. You know, so. And my father was also incredibly abusive, physically and emotionally. So all of that just killed my hope entirely. And I remember I found myself one day in my mother's bathtub. I was going to be alone for the next 6 hours. And I'm in her bathtub, not because I was going to take any kind of a bath, but because I was contemplating something that so many people contemplate nowadays. Something that is an epidemic, something that the only other cause of death that's going to be greater than that in the future is cancer. So I was sitting in this tub in an empty house. I had an 8-inch chef's knife in my hand, crying my eyes out because this was it. This was my final moments in this earth. I lost hope entirely. And I thought, you know, I don't know what's on the other side of living. I don't know where we go when we die. I don't know if heaven is real. I don't know if hell is real. I know that I've heard if you commit suicide, you go to hell. And yet in that moment, knowing full well what I'd been told, what hell is, I thought, I'll take that over what I'm experiencing now any day of the week. So if there is a way to make your peace with God, if you're about to commit suicide, I did my best to do that. Grab that knife in my hand, which by the way, must have weighed 1,000 pounds. Slowly brought it out, looked at it, crying, decided, you know what? And this is sort of, I don't know if I'd call it poetic irony, but at my house at the time, my brother was constantly getting injured. And initially when I got home, I was looking for his pills because I thought I'll just drink a bunch of pills and overdose and they'll find me cold and hopefully long gone. Couldn't find any. And the interesting is they had always been there. I knew my father had a gun. So I searched like a child looking for Christmas presents. Didn't find it. It's in the one place I didn't look. I'd come to learn that. I thought, okay, I could hang myself. So I looked for rope. Interestingly enough, we had rope, but we didn't have an internet connection, so I couldn't research how to tie a noose. There was a knife, so I can grab the knife. So I'm in the tub with the knife, counting down. I must have counted down 3, 2, 1, 100 times. When I finally got the courage to do it, brought it out, plunged it into my chest. And I plunged it into my chest. I know this because I was wearing a white V-neck t-shirt and it was covered in blood, but for some reason, I felt like that knife hit a brick wall. And I didn't stab myself in the ribcage. I stabbed myself right there. I felt like it hit a brick wall, completely bringing it to a dead stop. And I heard something in my head and it scared the life out of me. I heard somebody scream, "Stop." And it stopped the knife. And then I heard a question. The question was, what if suicide wasn't an option? And, you know, now with my certifications, which, I mean, you already went into them. I don't need to go into them, but we know that questions, powerful questions, have the unique ability of piercing the unconscious mind. And when you pierce the veil of the unconscious mind, even if you don't want to, you're going to answer.
Yep.
You're going to answer. And there's a difference, I think we can agree, right, between you have so much to live for, don't do this, versus what if this wasn't an option? That question didn't come from me.
No.
I answered it. I thought, well, I'm just in the tub panting, blood pouring down my shirt. I thought, well, if I can't commit suicide, if I can't kill myself, I can be angry. I can hate my dad. I can hate my grandfather. I can hate my uncles. I can hate my teachers. I can hate everybody who has ever made me feel this way and brought me to this point. I can moan, I can complain, I can continue to cry, but the one thing I can't do is what I'm inclined to do. And after I did all that stuff, I went through this interesting transcendental midlife crisis at 11 years old, emotional, psychological breakdown. I hated everybody at that point. I thought, well, you've done everything. All you can do is be proactive. All you can do is see how you can move past where you are right now and transcend this. So in my own way, I thought, and I took inventory of everything that I did not like about myself up until this point. What did I currently hate about my life? I thought, well, I don't like that I can't relate to people. Part of that is not my own fault. Well, wasn't my own fault at the time. Being labeled as being on the spectrum of autism, it makes relating to individuals a little bit more difficult than for the average person. I thought, well, I don't like the fact that I'm 70 pounds overweight and I get winded when I tie my shoes. I can fix that. I don't like the fact that I'm painfully shy. So I thought, well, let's do things so that slowly we can crawl out of this hole. I cried a little bit more. I took my shirt off. I threw it away. I patched myself up with some duct tape as best I could because I didn't want my mom to know what had happened. Threw on a fresh shirt and went on this beautiful journey called life. And I remember my father, my stepdad, I should say, who has been raising me since I was 3. So he's my father, was always a big believer in listening to personal development audio in the car. And I remember in the mid 90s when a gentleman by the name of Tupac Shakur came out with a song called California Love. Everybody was crazy about that song. And I remember I was desperate to hear it, but I couldn't hear the radio in my dad's car because my dad was listening to Les Brown. He was listening to Tony Robbins. He was listening to Jim Rohn, to Kevin Trudeau, to Zig Ziglar, to Brian Tracy. He was in sales, so he was doing his best to become better at that and to master his own mindset and overcome his own demons. But I remember Dad has these audio tapes and these programs. So I dusted off an old Walkman from like 1985 and I grabbed his audio tapes, put them in, and I just started listening to them. I started reading the books that he had by these same men. And, I just started learning strategies slowly but surely. And I started adopting them, and I enrolled in acting classes so that I would stop being painfully shy and I'd be okay. And I'd learn how to relate to people because you have to relate to people if you're doing scenes with them. I started being more loving. One of the things about being on the autism spectrum is that you and touch and tactile stimulation have an interesting relationship. So I just started deciding, what, regardless of what my diagnosis say I'm going to be like, regardless of what they say life is going to be, if I do the opposite, then theoretically speaking, I should have a different result. Mm-hmm. So I started being more vocal. I started being more loving. I started being more reciprocal of the love that I was receiving at the time. I started doing my best to diet and work out. Like anything else, life doesn't move in a linear fashion, right? Life has an ebb and a flow to it. I always say life is like a heart attack on a heart monitor. It's boop, 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 right? So during my stint in learning how to be better and learning how to lose weight and all that, I developed anorexia, I developed bulimia, and again, I'm grateful for that, because doing what I do now with holistic health, I understand that there's a mindset behind addiction. There's a mindset behind depression. There's a mindset behind self-destructive habits and thoughts. So long story short, I should say short story long, because I feel like I've been talking forever, but long story short, we tend to begrudge the people who cause us pain. And if we're massive overachievers, we also begrudge our Heavenly Father for bringing pain toward us. I once heard from one of the great teachers of my life, a woman who I love dearly, a woman who I would not be the man I am without today. And I'm not talking about my mother. I'm talking about a woman named Melody Garcia. She told me that the attacks that happen on your life have nothing to do with who you are right now, but who you're meant to become.
It's interesting, isn't it? I've worked with a lot of people who've been abused. And I think, those people who are listening, there are many people who've been abused in all sorts of ways. And I think one of the common responses, certainly in my experience, is that people use food to comfort and to feel a sense of control.
Absolutely.
And if there's nothing else I can control in my life, I can control what's going into my mouth. And to recognize that, that sense of protection, because I've got big, then I'm going to be strong, or I'm going to be unattractive, so people won't approach me in that same way. Or whether you're addicted to something else and you're using that as an anesthetic to stop the hurt, but to recognize that actually that does not have to define you. That the gift, and there is a gift in even the hardest situations in life, is if you recognize that you are the most amazing, resilient, talented person who has been shaped by that awful set of experiences, and it's how you then choose to use that as you move forward that makes the difference.
Absolutely. The Japanese have a style of art called kintsugi. And a broken pot is essentially worthless, a broken clay pot. And yet they take these broken pieces and they weld them together with 24 karat gold. And that right there is a real world representation artistically of what you just said. The darkest, most painful moments where we feel like we've been broken, if we look hard enough, there can be beauty there. This is a pearl bracelet from my jewelry line.
Yeah.
And I wear pearls for a very particular reason. Yeah, they're pretty and all that, but at the end of the day, what is a pearl? How does a pearl come to formation?
Yeah.
You have a mollusk, an oyster that's feeding, and at one point during the process, a grain of sand enters its habitat. And an oyster is very soft, they're very delicate. A grain of sand is very abrasive. So this grain of sand is scratching it and abrading it and hurting it. And instead of allowing that to continue, it starts to send proteins to encapsulate the grain of sand. And it keeps layering layer upon layer upon layer until a pearl is formed. And if that is not a beautiful metaphor for what we as human beings have the capacity of achieving and of creating by our own God-given free will, that we can take something painful and turn it into a treasure. I look back at my life and I think, I'm so grateful for everything I went through, because it gave me a spiritual strength where I know that nothing that life throws at me can break me. Nothing. But at the same time, it gave me an education. And we're all teachers at the end of the day. And I can teach other individuals who are going through addiction, who are going through physical abuse, sexual abuse, who are going through the darkest things that humanity faces. And I can show them that there's a light at the end of that tunnel, and it's not a train, it's God, and it's salvation.
I'm really interested, before we sort of move on to the rest of your story and your life, that for me, that when I've worked with people who've been through trauma and abuse, one of the most important things is forgiveness. And I talked about forgiveness is not about condoning the act, nor is it about forgetting the act, but it is about letting go of the chain that yanks you back into that place and keeps you captured. I'd be really interested to explore with you what your take on forgiveness is and what part it's had to play in your journey.
Absolutely. I'm a fan of literature, being a writer. And Les told me that if you can, memorize one quote a day. And many years ago, I came across a quote by a man named Mark Twain. And this is my favorite quote about forgiveness. And it reads, "Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it."
That's beautiful.
That's about as beautiful as anything I've heard.
Yeah.
You know? And ultimately, that's what forgiveness is. Forgiveness means that you are giving, you're not absolving them of what they did. We tend to link weakness to forgiveness because, you know, and I'm being incredibly sarcastic right now because there is so much power in begrudging somebody.
Well,
that is
an illusion. There's an illusion now, isn't there?
Absolutely. Because in that moment, we feel the way that we feel right before we fight. Our heart rate is high, we're angry, we're ready to break something. And in this state, in this, you know, when your amygdala is firing, you're incredibly upset. Nobody can hurt you because you're ready for whatever's coming. You're absolving yourself of continued pain. You know, another famous Nelson Mandela quote: resentment is like drinking poison and hoping that it's going to kill your enemy. That's what it is. We want to go into holistically. It manifests in so many different ways. They've shown that a great many autoimmune diseases are linked to trauma and a resentment built around that trauma.
I think when we look at the number of people who are suffering from emotional and mental illness and physical illnesses, I think at the core of much of that is unhappiness, bitterness, frustration, resentment, and letting go of those things, not ignoring them, not being a Pollyanna and just smile, but actually dealing with them and taking the learning from them. Then you have an opportunity to heal. So
and it's pardon?
No, you go ahead. You were saying.
I was going to say it's difficult because we're hardwired to avoid pain. On a biological level, we're hardwired to avoid pain. And what you just said, dealing with it, requires opening that door that we shut long ago. And this weed that was probably this big when we shut that door is now a gargantuan tree.
I like the dragon. And when you let the dragon in the box and when you let the lid off, it's very difficult to get the dragon back in the box because it's breathing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, one of my greatest tools when it comes to just really letting go and dealing with it is, I heard a quote that said, if you spend 10 minutes with your greatest enemy, you'll learn that you have more in common with them than you think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when we truly understand that the attacks have nothing to do with who we are, but who we're meant to become. And we put ourselves, it's challenging, but empathy truly is, and compassion, the antidote to all this stuff. I remember I had so much resentment toward my father. You know, my father was very emotionally and verbally abusive, but also physically abusive. And I resented him for it. I mean, there are other things that I go into detail, which is going to be in the book that I'm writing, that I'm finishing up. And I don't want to spoil it, but I had to learn about my dad. I had to learn about how he grew up. I had to learn from him. I had to learn from my aunts. I had to learn from my uncle. I had to learn from my mother back when they were married. And in truly learning about my father and about his just terrible upbringing, and in learning how much of a monster his father was, I thought, wow, my dad went through all this stuff, and he didn't do 80% of what was done to him, to me. So he was actively trying to be better and do his best. And who am I, right? The Bible says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Judgment is for him, not for us. Who am I to judge my father for not meeting my expectations of how I think he should have been as a father?
I think there are likely to be people who are listening to this to say to you, it's not necessarily your expectations of what makes a good father, but the general expectations of what is reasonable and what's not. But what strikes me is that you have, through your actions, that you've brought to a close the ancestral cycle, because it's so often that generation after generation, there's patterns of behavior that are less than positive and helpful that get continued. And whether that's at a belief level around, how you're supposed to behave, or money, or whatever, or whether it's at an increased level, I think what's important, certainly for me, is that we have the choice. If we feel that previous generations, our parents, grandparents, whoever, have a way of being that is less than enlightened, then we have the opportunity to change that.
Yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
forward.
Yeah, absolutely. My faith ties hugely into not just my practice, but in just my life. And I once heard have you read the book A Course in Miracles by any chance?
Yes.
Do you remember the quote, if you knew who walked beside you on this path that you have chosen, you could never experience fear?
Yeah.
So truly, and there's a difference between knowing something intellectually and knowing something spiritually in your heart and your soul and in your gut, where if you truly know who walked beside you, who's always been there through the good times and through the dark times, knowing who he's sculpting and shaping you to become, because you're meant to make an impact. And I defy you to find me a diamond that didn't get burned, that didn't get crushed, that didn't experience pressure or heat or solitude or darkness. They don't exist.
No.
They don't.
We know that in order to create that beautiful jewel, that the pressures of the earth have been upon it. But I'm sure that there are lots of people who are listening to this interview who, particularly over the last, as we record this in November 2020, who have been through perhaps some of the most difficult months that they've ever experienced due to all of the impact of the pandemic. And there'll be people for whom they may have a different faith. They may believe in universal energy or the soul. And I think, whoever you are and whatever your faith is to recognize that actually that there is there's a stronger source than us, and there is that connection between us which makes us stronger if we choose to tune into it.
Yeah.
I think, for so many people, that sense of isolation and being alone feeds into people's unhappiness. I don't know if you've ever read the book Lost Connection by Johann. Have you ever read that?
No, I've yet to have the pleasure.
Right, I would really recommend it to you because it's a book all about depression. But looking at the general view of what depression is and how it's treated, and it comes down to 7 reasons for depression and how we can deal with them. And ultimately, I think at the core of it is actually coming home to being ourselves and recognizing that we have purpose and that we are animals who need that connection.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've quoted scripture. So let me quote science so that we bridge that gap.
Yeah.
A man by the name of Albert Einstein quoted, a man of science, a man of logic, a man of facts, figures, things that have to be substantiated, corroborated, and repeatable.
Yes.
Said the most important decision that a human being can make is whether they live in a friendly or a hostile universe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you've got so many examples at the moment of where people believe that they live in a hostile environment and they are in flight and fight mode, mainly fight. And the results are catastrophic for everybody involved.
Yeah.
I'd like to come back and ask you some more questions, but Sukhdev, have you any questions that you'd like to be asking Mark?
Yeah, so I really want the audience to walk away with something from your experiences. So what message would you give to children who are facing the same things you faced when you were a child? And what message would you have for parents who have children who are maybe on the spectrum of autism and you know have eating disorders or their personal challenges that you had? What would you have to say to the kids and the parents separate?
So to the kids, I would say just with and it's going to be very simple. It gets better, and talk about it. Just talk about it, because the things that we leave and we sweep under the rug, quantum physics, right? Everything can go back to quantum physics, dictates that energy can't be destroyed. So in essence, everything is alive. When we sweep something under the rug, it gets bigger. So to kids, I would say, talk about it, be vocal. Your parents are there to help you and to guide you. And there is nothing wrong with you. I would say that you are perfect because you are made in the Creator's image. You're like my mentor, Liz Brown, says, you are a masterpiece because you're a piece of the master. So to kids, I would just say, be vocal and know that no matter what, you are loved, you are protected. And to the parents, I would say, just like I told the kids, speak up, I would tell the parents, care enough to pay attention. You know, we live in a world where this device right here that I'm using to film this has replaced parenting by and large. And it's no wonder that the world is in this current state, because we're not relating to one another, we're not connecting. We're putting bandages, we're distracting, we're numbing. And as a parent, you know, children didn't ask to be here. We bring them here, which means that they're our responsibility, and it's our moral responsibility to ensure that we don't perpetuate our experience and we give them a far better version of that. And it starts with caring, and it starts with compassion, and it starts with really being invested in who this little child is and who they're going to become ultimately.
Yeah,
it's nature and nurture.
Yeah, so well, what if you have a parent who is there for their child and they see their child going through these challenges and they just don't know what to do? They're there for them, you know, they don't, they're trying to, you know, they don't give them the iPad, and but they're just stuck. They're like, what can I do for my kid? Like, and then it's hurting them as a parent. So, you know, what would you have to say to a parent like that?
There are, fortunately, and it's funny that you bring that up, because I'm actually working with a case like that right now. Initially, it was going to be with just the child, but it's a symbiotic relationship between parent and child. So now it's support the child and help the child and coach the child, but also the parent through this relationship. And again, bridge that gap. There's a beautiful Native American proverb I love that says, there are no branches foolish enough as to fight amongst themselves, because they all recognize they're part of the same tree. We're all part of the same thing, right? So to the parent, I would say, sometimes you can fix it. Sometimes you have the answer, and sometimes you have the solution. But again, Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. You can either raise your child with your ego or with your heart. It doesn't have to be you. There are people who are trained, who specialize in however complicated you think your scenario is, or you think your situation is. I guarantee you there are hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, who are certified in that specific crazy scenario that you're facing right now. So reach out. Again, we weren't born by ourselves. We're a community. We are a 7.5 billion person community.
You know,
and we all have to support each other.
Awesome.
I started off my professional life as a principal of a large school.
Mm.
And there are a number of things, and I have to say that in terms of a school, we worked very hard to value each child and to help them develop self-belief and confidence.
Thank you for that, by the way.
And one of the things that we ran confident parenting courses, because so many parents were frightened to be firm. And by firm, I don't mean in any way abusive. But one of the best bits of advice I think that one can give parents is the brain doesn't compute the word don't. You know, don't think of a pink elephant. So when you're saying to your child, don't do this and don't do that, just imagine you take the word don't out and actually you're encouraging them to do the very thing that you don't want. That what children need is your time. They want your attention.
Yeah.
They don't need stuff. And so many children, I think, these days play up because they don't get attention when they're being good and quiet. They get attention when they're either being a pain in the neck or they're poorly. And so you often have children who do one or the other or both in order to get their parents' attention. But just sitting down and having a meal around the table and engaging in conversation, taking an interest in their day. I know when kids go through the teenage years, when they go ugh, that, you know, conversation may get a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
If you've done it beforehand and you create that relationship, it will hold you in good stead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Sukhdev, to also answer what you asked, the deeper that we understand ourselves, right? Because we can only understand somebody else and somebody else's experience to the depth that we've understood ourselves. And we have parents who, like, my mom had me when she was, I think, 19 years old.
Yeah.
She was a kid. We would watch cartoons on Saturday mornings, not because I was a kid, but because she used to love watching X-Men. So I walked in on her one day watching X-Men one Saturday morning. And I remember saying, Mom, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I'm watching cartoons. Can I join you? Sure. So we have parents who haven't taken the time to explore the depths of who they are and of what they want and of what life is about. And because it's just been work after work after work and distraction. You know, this isn't a culture that values introspection. It values doing.
Yeah. So
I urge parents to get to know who you are. Get to know what your values are. Get to know what your virtues are. Like you said, whether it's with universal consciousness, with nature, or whether you choose God, have some kind of a belief system. It's belief in something greater than you has been shown to not just not just make you more intelligent, but prolong your life and also that of your relationships. So in addition to seeking people who have the answers to your questions, become a student of life, become a student of, there's I think it was General Patton who said it's important to become a practical psychologist, understanding that there are certain predictable elements of human nature and human behavior. And if you can educate yourself enough just to be able to influence them, you're going to be able to relate to your kids far more effectively.
That's really, really sound advice. Now, you are an author and your books
Yes.
have reached international best-selling status. Could you please share with us what your published books are and give people information on what you can share with us about the book that's going to come out very soon?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've been in holistic nutrition for about 15 years now, in holistic health and detoxification protocols and just weight loss management and anything pertaining to living a happier, more holistically balanced life, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc. So I wrote a book back when the ketogenic diet was the new hot thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing research, and I'm not gonna demonize anybody, but at the end of the day, with every brand new fad diet, you're gonna have people who are out to just capitalize and make money. And I find it despicable. I find it morally reprehensible to choose money over somebody's health.
Yeah.
and to be a proponent and a supporter and a condoner of unhealthy, dangerous practices just because you're wrapping it up in a sexy way and because it's the new thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that is the equivalent. You might as well be a drug dealer on the street. So I looked at all these individuals who were basically presenting a method of the ketogenic diet, which was going to result in weight loss, but at the cost of long-term health.
Right.
And we're talking things like renal failure, cancer, just horrible, horrible things. And for me, it's not about the way that you look, it's about the way that you feel and your quality of life.
Yeah.
Right? Abs are a great thing to have, but if you have to choose between abs and renal failure, if the cost of your abs would be renal failure versus not having abs and being healthy, I don't want them.
No.
So I studied this diet extensively in 2013, but it became incredibly popular around 2017, 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And I used myself as a guinea pig. I thought, okay, I'll get blood work done on a monthly basis just so I can check. And I'm talking full panel blood work.
Yeah.
Including renal function, including thyroid, every single hormone, in addition to inflammatory markers. So I made sure that I concocted and I created this protocol where it would still fall under the ketogenic diet, but it was radically different.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that I can keep my inflammatory markers low, my testosterone high, my vitamins, my minerals, every single hormonal function, every single organ function, normal, within the normal healthy ranges, sustainably for at least, I believe I did it for half a year.
Mm-hmm.
And if at that half year, it was consistent on a monthly basis, identical results, okay, now I can write this book with the protocol and present it so that if you decide you want to follow the ketogenic diet, you can do it a healthy way. You can do it a way that is sustainable and that has a proven track record.
Yeah.
So that's a keto book. I'm also coming out with a vegan and vegetarian book as well. But the next book is called the Level Up Handbook.
Yeah.
So Level Up and Level Up is a lot like Own Your Dreams, but Level Up is, we all have this idea for our lives, and we don't always feel like we are where we want to be. And we don't all have the same start at life. I say we all have 24 hours in a day, but that's about all we have equal. That's about it. That's our ultimate equalizer. And even then, some of us won't even get 24 hours. Right? So all we have is right now.
Yeah.
So it's an anthology of individuals who didn't have the best start, but were able to take what God gave them, wherever it is that they were, and turn it into something beautiful. You know, there's a incredible story about a young woman who's a dear friend of mine, who was raped when she was, I believe, 12 years old. And it was incredibly violent. It was incredibly violent. And the way that she was treated afterward, it was like they just pushed her out of the van and drove off and said bye. And it was by somebody that she knew. It was by an older brother of a friend. This is somebody who is now an entrepreneur, has their own media company, and is, you know, a incredible mother, and is just thriving. And this book is full of stories like that. Again, the pearl. People who faced opposition like the majority of people aren't going to face, and were able to make something beautiful as a result of it. And Own Your Dreams, it's just about that. It's about, how do you take a vision, how do you take a dream and take complete ownership of it in spite of opposition, in spite of, you know, spiritual, financial opposition, in spite of having family opposition, which is really big. You know, oftentimes, I always say the biggest haters that you're going to have are related to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So new book. Sorry, Sukhdev, did you say something?
Yeah. So I was just going to ask. So we know that for the like leveling up and owning your dreams, you had a coach, Les Brown.
Yeah.
And so how big of a part does a coach play, and would you recommend a coach to anybody who is looking to level up their life and get to the next stages and growth?
Absolutely. You know, I will say that a good coach doesn't come cheap. When it comes to coaching, when it comes to one-on-one coaching, you tend to get what you pay for, like anything else in life, right? And that's not to say that something expensive is going to be inherently good. But if I look at somebody and I see that they have a proven track record, and I see they've invested more than I have into my personal development, and they've got tangible results that supersede my own, this person has something that not only do I desire, but that I need. So of course a coach is critical. Before I had any disposable income to spend on coaches, and I'm going to say this to the person who happens to be in this same financial bind, which post quarantine is a great very many people.
Yes.
I will say that in my life, some of my greatest mentors died long ago. Rumi, Patanjali, Nisargadatta Maharaj. Where's this book that I had? Oh, it's somewhere else. But Lao Tzu from the Tao Te Ching. You know, these are incredible teachers who have taught me. Saint Germain, the writings of Saint Germain. Teachers who have taught me a great deal. So a coach is absolutely necessary. A teacher is absolutely necessary and critical. But the caveat is, you don't always have to pay for one. Oftentimes, you find one right here in a book. I mean, there have been so many men from history who, like I said, are long gone, who have influenced who have become today based on a documentation of their journey and their wisdoms.
And also talk to the stepdad that you had when you were listening to the audiobooks in the car instead of two.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's really funny because, you know, you want to talk about how God works full circle. I remember hearing this guy talk about, you got to be hungry. You got to chase your dream. And I remember like, whoa, this guy has a lot of energy. I didn't know who he was.
I know who he was.
Sukhdev, I went on YouTube one day. I was I think 16 or 17 years old, and at the height of when YouTube was really popular. And I see this black man on this thumbnail, and it said something about motivation, and I click on it, and I hear the same voice. Now, mind you, this is 10 or 11 years later, and immediately I think to myself, that's the guy from my dad's car. And I immediately fell in love with his content because I could appreciate it more.
Mm.
But the second I heard the voice, immediately I was like, wow, you know, my dad, God, has been programming me since way back when for right now.
Yeah.
Well, fast forward, well, another 11 or 12 years after that, and I'm at an event, and I was completely late to the event. I was about 6 hours late. It was a Les Brown event. I really wanted to hopefully see him speak. And something told me, you're going to be fine. Doesn't matter if you're 6 hours late and there's 45 minutes left during the event. You're going to be fine. The universe is as it should be. Well, guys, I kid you not. I walked through those double doors in the hotel lobby. I walk toward the back, make my way toward the grand ballroom. It's empty, save 2 people. A gentleman who I don't know the relation of that person, and Les Brown. And my heart stops, I think, and I learned that they're on break and there was somebody else speaking and he was outside kind of catching his breath. Immediately I walk up to him, this man that played such a critical role in my development and in my life, and somebody who was a mentor to me, and somebody who I was quoting, somebody who changed who I became unknowingly. I walked up to him and I said, Les, I imagine you're busy, but I just have to tell you that, you know, thank you. Thank you for guiding me through my dark moments without you knowing. Thank you for being a part of my childhood. Thank you for being a part of my adulthood. And just thank you for being a teacher to me. And he looks at me and he's like, young man, you have such presence. You can't teach that. I was like, you know, Les Brown telling me this, oh my goodness. And I told him that my dad was a huge fan and even my mother. And this man said, call your mom. I want to talk to her. And he talked to my mom on the phone. He's like, I want to go have dinner with you at your house. And well, fast forward about a year or a year and a half after that. And I have him on speed dial because he decided to be, you know, he became my mentor. And I say he's like my third father. Became my friend, my dear friend, who I love dearly. Les Brown, I love you.
We'll send him a copy of this.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. He wrote the
a guest on the show, Sukhdev. You're very good at
yes.
Great
Yeah.
guest.
He wrote the foreword for Own Your Dreams, and he's also writing the foreword for my next book, which I promised to talk about, which is my experience dealing with mental health issues since I was about 5 or 6, you know, being given all those labels and it culminating in a suicide attempt, and really how I dug my way out of that. And at the tail end of knowing what learning what I learned about suicide and my education and everything. I shouldn't say at the tail end because that makes it sound like I know everything I need to know. And I don't know anywhere near as much as I want to know, but
need to know and want to know are 2 different things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's obviously anybody that's experienced the harrowing, heart-wrenching thoughts. You know, I always say that when you're contemplating suicide, it's like having your worst critic in your head and they do not ever shut up. It's an incessant, for me anyway, and for those individuals that I've been fortunate enough to work with and help liberate from that. It's having somebody constantly reaffirming everything that you do not like about yourself, every dark thing that's ever happened to you, and every inclination that you have to hurt yourself, you're met with, absolutely, just do it, kill yourself already. Mm-hmm. So it's my experience with that, and it's geared toward primarily millennials, which are the group of individuals who have been hit the hardest with this. But it's essentially a guide. It's, you know, so you don't have to go to therapy if you can't afford to hire me as a coach or any other coach for that matter to help you navigate through this. I'm very transparent, just like I was with my keto book. I give every single formula that nutritionists charge several $100s for, up to thousands of dollars for. I made that investment in my education and I give it away freely. So in this book, I do the very same thing. Things that I've paid tens of thousands of dollars for. Tools, strategies that I've learned from the greatest mentors to the greatest books. And I give this information for free because at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do from the way that I was raised and my view on ethics and morality and just my code of conduct as a man of God. And yeah, it's out of everything I've done, and I don't know if I've said, but I've got about 8 to 9 books that I'm going to be releasing within the next couple of years. They're practically all finished. But this is the one thing that I'm most passionate about because it's the one thing I was afflicted with. And I've lost friends to suicide, friends of friends to suicide, and I had my own experience. So this is something that my goal, you know, aside from it having touching as many lives as possible on this earth, because it's an epidemic. I'm launching a campaign. I can't talk about it right now, but every 40 seconds, somebody on this planet takes their own life.
It's the most common reason for males under 45 dying in the UK, bar none.
Wow.
The most common reason.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what you're offering, I hope that those people will find it because they need a resource. And if you're listening to this program and you are someone who is struggling, please talk to someone, get some help, buy the book, recognize. And I'd like we've come to the end of the show, and I think a really great place would be the question that you asked yourself in the bath, which I believe is going to be the title of the book.
Yes.
I think that if you could leave us with that question, but before we come to that, if people wanted to get hold of you, if they wanted to work with you, where would they find you?
You can find me on Instagram, markanthony.king, on Facebook, Mark Anthony King, lifemasterystrategist.com, and drop me an email at mark@lifemasterystrategist.
So before I say, and we say thank you and be a guest, what's the title of the new book going to be? What's the question that made all the difference?
The question that made all the difference in my life is, what if suicide wasn't an option? And I'm going to be, for a certain number of books that are sold, I'm going to be giving these away. These are also going to be for sale on the website. But to me, this is going to be the next Livestrong bracelet, because whenever anybody feels those thoughts creeping up, you look down at your wrist and you think, what if this wasn't an option? And if it's not an option, then you can do anything else except that.
That's something brilliant. We'll put all of the details in the show notes. And if you let me have them, we'll put the details of your jewelry business as well. So if people want something filled in, that they can find that too.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for being a guest. Your story is incredible.
An honor.
And I have a feeling that you've only just begun. So Sukhdev, would you like to have the last words today?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. It's been, you're so inspirational, full of so much positive energy, and just everything that the audience is going to take away from everything you shared with us is going to be, it's going to be really helpful for a lot of people out there.
Honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So join us on the next show. You'll find them on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. We're very pleased to have you, and thank you once again. Take care.